What would you do if your own family drained your savings and laughed while doing it? How do you stay calm when the people who raised you treat you like a wallet instead of a son? That's what I faced the night of our reunion, the night everything became clear. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Michael Reyes, and I was 42 years old the night my own family showed me exactly what I was worth to them. I was sitting in my car in front of my parents' house, watching the warm yellow light in the windows and listening to the laughter coming through the thin glass. It was our yearly family reunion, the big one my mother loved to plan. She called it her way of keeping everyone together. I knew what it really meant for me. It meant driving across town, bringing a bottle of something nice, and ending the night paying for things I never agreed to pay for. I took a slow breath and stepped out of the car. The front lawn looked the same as always. My father's old pickup sat crooked in the driveway. The white paint on the porch rail was peeling again. He had stopped caring about little details years ago. If something broke, he called me. If a bill came and it looked too big, he called me. He never said he needed help. He simply told me what I should do, and he expected it to happen. My mother opened the door before I even knocked. She pulled me inside and told me I was late. I checked the time and saw I was actually 10 minutes early. She did not wait for my answer. She was already talking about food in the oven and cousins in the backyard. She told me my brother Lucas and my sister Elaine had been there all day helping, and she said it in a way that made it clear she wanted me to feel guilty. I walked into the living room. Lucas was on the couch, legs spread wide, one arm over the back like he owned the place. He wore a new watch that was much too expensive for someone who never kept a job longer than a few months. Elaine was standing near the window, showing pictures on her phone to two aunts. I heard my own name and the word responsible used like it was a weakness. When they saw me, they greeted me with fake surprise, like I had just wandered in by accident. My father sat in his old armchair like a king on a throne. He did not stand up. He told me I finally decided to join them. He asked if work had been too exciting for me. He said it in that tone that put the word engineer next to boring in his head. He told the room that I liked to hide in my office with my little projects. People laughed. I smiled a little and shrugged. After 42 years with this family, I knew my role. I worked as a project engineer for a construction firm. It was a quiet job from the outside. I handled budgets, schedules, safety plans. When people saw me, they saw a man with a laptop and spreadsheets. They did not see the late nights, the careful planning, the responsibility. At work, people respected that. At home, my father treated it like I was still a teenager stacking boxes in a store. Dinner was loud and crowded. My mother squeezed everyone around the table she loved so much. She told everyone how proud she was to have her 3 children together. Then, in the next breath, she told my cousins how much Lucas had struggled this year, how he had been brave after losing his last job again. She said Elaine had 2 children and so much stress, so of course everyone had to support her. When she got to me, she said I was lucky to have such a stable job and no kids to worry about. She said it like stability was a prize I had not earned. People started talking over each other. My uncle asked if I was still living in the same apartment and then made a comment about how nice it must be to have no responsibilities. Someone else asked if I was still saving every penny like a squirrel. They said that at least one of us knew how to hold on to money. A cousin joked that if anyone needed a loan, they should stand in line near my chair. I cut my food into small pieces and kept my face neutral. I had heard all of this before. I watched Lucas, who told everyone that the job market was impossible and that no one understood how hard it was for him. I watched Elaine, who rolled her eyes at the idea of budgeting and told my aunt that money always worked out because family helped family. I sat there and thought about all the times I had paid for Lucas's broken car, late rent, or unpaid phone bill. I thought about the time I covered half of Elaine's wedding costs because my father had forgotten to plan for them. No one mentioned any of that. When dinner ended, people drifted into the living room. My mother took plates away while telling me she wished I would visit more. My father patted the arm of his chair and told Lucas to change the channel. He did not ask. Lucas grabbed the remote like it was his right. Elaine sat on the floor near my mother's feet, scrolling on her phone, showing videos to whoever would look. My father called my name and jerked his head toward the hallway. He told me he needed a quick word in the kitchen. He said it in front of everyone so it felt like an order, not a request. I followed him. The kitchen was hot from the oven. The smell of roasted meat and sugary desserts hung heavy in the air. He leaned against the counter and folded his arms. He did not waste time. He told me that there had been some emergencies lately. He said the roof needed work, and Lucas had some serious bills, and Elaine's husband had been short on cash. He told me that as a family they had made a decision. He said they needed money fast, and I was the one who could help. I asked him what he meant. My voice stayed calm. My hands did not. I noticed my fingers pressing into my own palm. He looked at me like I was stupid and reminded me of the online banking access I had given him years ago when he had surgery and could not leave the house. He said it was still useful. He said they had used it. He added that it was nothing serious, just one account. The air in the room felt thinner. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. My main savings account always sat at a number I did not talk about with anyone. I had spent years putting money there. Raises, bonuses, careful saving. I watched the screen load. Then I saw the balance. 0, not less, not low, 0. The app showed a recent transfer, large enough to almost make me laugh. It was not neat. It was messy and rushed. Most people would have panicked at that number. I did not. I did not yell or throw the phone. I just stared at the screen while my father explained that they had needed it more than I did. He said that I had time to earn it back. He said I did not have a family to take care of, not really, so it made sense. He told me I should be glad to help. He said it proved I was a good son. My mother came in halfway through the explanation. She twisted her hands in her apron and told me that they had not wanted to bother me with details. She said she knew I would understand. She said family always helped family. She did not look me in the eye. I asked them how they thought this was acceptable. I did not raise my voice. I simply asked. My father looked offended. He told me that without him, I would never have had a good education, that he had worked himself half to death when I was young. He listed old sacrifices like they were new debts. He told me that this money was just a way of balancing the scales. He said I owed them for everything. My mother nodded and whispered that I could save again, that I did it once and I could do it again. She said Lucas could not. She said Elaine could not. She said they needed help more than I did. I looked at the two people who had raised me. In that moment, something very cold and very clear settled inside me. I felt my hands start to tremble, not from fear, but from the effort of keeping my voice even. I realized that in their heads, my work, my planning, my quiet life meant only one thing, a source of money they could tap whenever they wanted. They did not see a son. They saw a resource. Lucas walked into the kitchen carrying a beer and smirked when he saw us. He asked if I was really making a big deal about it. He said that I never did anything fun with my money anyway. He said that at least now it was useful. Elaine followed him and said in a tired voice that I was being dramatic again, that they were all stressed and I was the only one comfortable. She said I should stop acting like a victim. My father turned back to me and said that if I loved my family, I would let this go. He said it was already done. He shrugged, as if that was the end of the story. I stood there for a few seconds and listened to my own heartbeat in my ears. Then I put my phone in my pocket and straightened up. I told myself to breathe. I remembered long nights at my desk, every line item, every careful choice, every plan. I thought about the way my coworkers trusted me, how they knew I kept my word. I compared it to this kitchen, this hot, crowded room where my life's work had just been erased by people who did not even feel guilty. I walked past them and into the living room. Conversations dropped for a second as people saw my face, then picked up again when they did not see anger. They expected shouting. Instead, I picked up my bag from near the front door. It felt heavier than usual, even though I knew it held the same things it always did. My father followed me and asked where I thought I was going. He said the night was not over and that I was acting like a child. Lucas laughed behind him. Elaine rolled her eyes. A couple of cousins watched with the nervous attention people give to a minor accident on the highway. My mother hovered at the edge of the room, twisting a napkin in her hands. I turned and looked at all of them. I noticed their relaxed bodies, the easy way they held their drinks, the way they assumed I would stay, pay, and accept whatever they decided. They did not know it, but the moment he had told me they needed it more, something had clicked into place inside me. It was not rage. It was a line quietly moving from one side to the other. My hands were still shaking a little when I gripped the strap of my bag. I felt the rough fabric under my fingers, and that texture grounded me. I heard my own voice in my head, simple and calm. I told them that if they truly needed my money more than I did, then they would not mind what came next. They reacted exactly how I expected. Lucas laughed first. He said I was bluffing. He said I would cry for a week and then come back like nothing happened. Elaine told him not to encourage me. My father shook his head and muttered that I should grow up. The room buzzed with half-hidden smiles. No one took me seriously. They never had. As their laughter rose, my phone vibrated in my pocket. At the same time, a sharp, heavy sound came from the front of the house. It was the kind of sound that made everyone look up at once, a sound of something solid hitting wood. Conversations broke off. Glasses paused halfway to mouths. Heads turned toward the entryway. The front door swung open. The person at the door was my cousin Mateo, holding a tray of foil-covered dishes and trying to balance two small children who were already fighting over a toy. The loud sound had just been his shoulder bumping the door when he pushed it open too hard. Everyone laughed with relief. The tension that had filled the room for a moment disappeared. People turned away from me and back to the new noise, to the kids, to the food. I stood there with my bag in my hand and realized something important. For them, this moment would be nothing. In a week, they would not even remember that I had almost walked out. For me, this was the line where everything started to change. I put my bag back down near the door. Leaving right then would only give them another thing to twist into a story about me being sensitive. I decided I could stay a little longer, just enough to avoid giving them that satisfaction. I went back to the living room and watched everyone move around each other like a familiar dance. Lucas took a beer from the fridge without asking. Elaine found a chair near the center of the room and made herself the focus of a conversation about her kids' school. My father returned to his armchair and turned the volume on the television up just a little, like he was marking his territory. My mother carried plates and smiled too big, pretending nothing serious had just happened in the kitchen. Sitting there, I realized the pattern was not new. It had just never been so clear. When I was younger, my father liked to remind me that he came to this country with nothing. He repeated that story at every birthday, every holiday. He talked about working double shifts, about 2 jobs, and 1 pair of shoes. When I was a teenager, he used that story to tell me that school was my job and that I should not complain about anything. I believed him. At 18, I got a small scholarship to study engineering. The rest of the tuition we covered with loans and part-time work. When I moved into the dorm, my father told the relatives that his son would be an engineer and take care of the family someday. He said it with pride then, but even at that time, I could hear the expectation inside the pride. The words, "take care of the family," were already a promise I had not really agreed to. During college, I worked in the computer lab at night. I remember calling home one evening because my bank account was overdrawn. I had miscalculated the cost of books. My mother cried on the phone. She said they could not help much, that money was tight. She said my father had already taken a small loan for some car repairs and there was nothing left. I told her I understood and figured it out on my own. Later, I learned from an aunt that in that same month Lucas had crashed a borrowed car and my father had quietly paid to fix it. He had told the aunt that kids make mistakes and he had to step in. He never mentioned that to me. After graduation, my first job was with a small firm. The pay was not great, but it was enough. I was proud of myself. I remember calling my parents and telling them about my first real paycheck. My father congratulated me and then immediately told me about a problem with the house roof. He did not ask for help. He just said that the estimate from the contractor was impossible for them to pay. I offered to cover part of it. He hesitated for half a second and then told me that if I insisted, he would let me. That became the rhythm. Every time I stepped forward, he stepped back and left more weight on my shoulders. It did not start as a clear thing. At first it was small, a utility bill that got missed, a medical bill for my mother, help with a school trip for Elaine. Then Lucas turned 20 and discovered that he did not like work that involved waking up on time. He bounced from job to job. When he ran out of money, he called my parents and they called me. Sometimes my father would tell me that Lucas just needed a little boost to get things going. Sometimes my mother would say that Lucas would pay me back soon. He never did. One memory always comes back to me. Lucas was 24. He had finally found a stable job in a warehouse. He lasted 3 months. Then he was fired for missing too many days. My father called me on a Sunday morning and told me that Lucas had had a run of bad luck. He wanted me to meet them at a diner near their house. When I arrived, my parents and Lucas were already seated in a booth. My father explained that Lucas needed a car to get to interviews. Lucas looked down at his plate the whole time. My mother kept saying that a car was not a luxury, but a tool. I looked at Lucas and asked him how many applications he had put in. He said a few, in a low voice. My father cut me off and said that I could not understand how difficult things were now. At the end of that breakfast, I agreed to co-sign a used car loan for Lucas. For the next 2 years, I made most of the payments myself because Lucas was always between jobs. When the car finally broke down for good, my father said it was just metal and that family mattered more than money. No one talked about the loan after that. Elaine's situation looked different on the surface. She made more stable choices than Lucas. She studied, got a job as a receptionist, then as office manager, but she liked big gestures. Expensive clothes, perfect photos for social media, parties with themes. When she got engaged, she said she wanted a nice wedding, not a huge one, just tasteful. In practice, that meant a wedding that cost more than she or her fiancé could handle. My parents offered a small amount. Then my father called me and asked if I could help the young couple start their life right. I ended up paying for most of the venue deposit. Later, when the florist bill doubled and the photographer raised his price, I covered those too. At the wedding reception, Elaine took the microphone and thanked our parents for everything they sacrificed to give her the wedding of her dreams. She did not mention me at all. My father patted my shoulder as she spoke and told me quietly that this was my contribution as big brother. Sitting in my parents' living room after the reunion dinner, watching Lucas laugh with a beer in his hand and Elaine tell a story about how hard motherhood was, I realized how normal all this had become. Every time they needed something, they reached for me. Every time I needed respect, they looked away. I thought about my mother's health scare 3 years before. She had ended up in the emergency room with chest pain. They called me first. I had stayed at the hospital all night, talking to doctors, signing forms, sending updates to relatives who did not come. When the bills arrived months later and insurance did not cover everything, my father called in a tight voice and said that they were drowning. I took care of the rest without complaint. It felt right at the time. She was my mother. But the more I thought about it, the more I saw the pattern. They came to me for every emergency, but they never treated me like a partner in anything good. When Lucas posted photos from a trip to Vegas last year, he did not think about the fact that he still owed me money. When Elaine bragged online about the new furniture in her house, she did not mention that she was months behind on paying me back for a loan she had promised would be short-term. To them, these debts were not real. To me, they were nights of work, years of careful saving. After the reunion, I finally left the house when the crowd started to thin out. I told my parents I had work in the morning. My father told me not to be so serious and said I needed to relax more. Lucas slapped me on the back and told me cheerfully that I should not worry so much about numbers on a screen. Elaine gave me a quick hug and whispered that I was lucky to be single and free. None of them apologized for anything. In the car, I sat for a long time with my hands on the steering wheel. The street outside was quiet. The house behind me glowed with warm light, like a picture on a holiday card. It struck me that if someone took a photo right then and posted it, the caption would say something about family and love and togetherness. No one outside would guess that the people inside had just cleaned out their oldest son's savings account and laughed about it. When I finally started the engine and drove home, the city lights looked different to me. I reached my apartment late. It was a modest place. 1 bedroom, small kitchen, a living room that doubled as my office. People in my family liked to comment that after all the money I made, I could at least upgrade to a better place. They never understood that I chose this apartment because it was enough. I put my bag down by the desk and opened my laptop. I checked my other accounts. The emergency fund was still there. The retirement account was untouched. The main savings was still empty. Seeing the zero again did not surprise me this time. It just confirmed that the conversation in the kitchen had really happened. I remembered my first year at my current job. The company had been impressed with how I handled a project that everyone else thought was impossible. My manager had praised my calm approach. He had told me I had a talent for seeing the whole picture when others only saw problems. At the time, that comment had made me proud. Now I realized I had never used that talent on my own family. The next morning, I went to work early. The office was quiet, just the cleaning crew moving carts down the hall. I liked that time of day. For a little while, everything was still, and I could think clearly. I sat in a glass-walled conference room and spread out some project plans. For 10 minutes, I actually focused on them. Then my mind went back to the kitchen, the look on my father's face, the way Lucas had smirked. Later that day, my manager called a team meeting. We gathered in a bigger conference room with a projector and charts on the wall. He talked about a new contract we had secured. He thanked several members of the team by name, including me. He said my work had been key to landing it. When the meeting ended, a coworker came up to me. She had seen the way I had looked distracted and asked if everything was okay. I told her that my family was complicated. I gave a vague description of the reunion, the money, the way everyone had reacted. I did not go into detail, but it was enough. She frowned and asked why I let them treat me like that. She said that at work everyone knew I was the person who made sure things happened, the one who kept projects from falling apart. She said it was strange to imagine anyone talking down to me. Her words stayed with me after she walked away. In that glass conference room, with the charts still glowing on the wall, I had one of those quiet moments when you see yourself from the outside. At work, I was organized, respected, careful. At home, I let people step on me because they shared my last name. That night, back in my apartment, I heated leftovers and sat on the couch with my laptop open. Group chat notifications kept flashing on my phone. My family was still sharing photos from the reunion. My mother wrote that she felt blessed. Elaine posted about how grateful she was for family support. Lucas posted a joke about there always being one serious sibling in every family. Then he wrote that at least one of us had a good job and could be the emergency fund. My father replied in the chat. He wrote that this was what family was for, to help each other, and that some people needed to remember their place and stop counting every penny. Then Lucas added a message saying that if I did not like it, they would find someone else to help them. He wrote that I was not special, just a wallet with legs. Reading that line, I felt something in me settle. It was not a fire, not a sudden explosion. It was a steady, cold understanding. They already saw me as replaceable. They believed that if I walked away, someone else would step in and pay. They did not realize they had built their lives on the assumption that I would never change. I set my phone face down on the table. For a long moment, I just listened to the soft hum of my fridge and the distant sounds of traffic outside my window. Then I thought very clearly that maybe it was time to show them what happened when the person they thought was replaceable finally stopped playing his assigned role. The next weekend, my mother called and asked me to come over again. She said there were papers she needed help with and mentioned my father's health in a vague way. Her voice sounded small, so I agreed. Old habits die hard. When I arrived, the house looked the same as always. The porch light was on, even though it was afternoon. The curtains were half drawn. I could hear the television before I even reached the door. My father liked to keep the volume high, like background noise made him feel important. Inside, my mother had spread envelopes and letters across the dining table. She told me that she needed help going through some mail. She said that insurance forms confused her and that the bank had sent something she did not understand. I sat down and started sorting them into piles. Most of it was normal: utility bills, junk mail, a flyer for a supermarket. But then I found a bank letter with my name on it. The address was my apartment, but the envelope had clearly been opened and resealed. The edges were rough. My mother watched me while I noticed this, then looked away quickly. The letter inside mentioned the large transfer that had emptied my savings. It stated the date, the time, and confirmed that it had been made from an authorized user using an old login. At the bottom, it suggested that if I had not intended the transfer, I should contact the bank. I felt my heartbeat pick up. I asked my mother calmly how my name's letter had ended up on their table. She said it must have been a mistake, that the post office sometimes mixed things. Her eyes did not meet mine. My father walked in, saw the letter in my hand, and told me to stop overthinking everything. He said the bank probably sent it because they knew about the transfer and assumed I was fine with it. When I asked again why my mail had been opened, my father told me not to use that tone with him. He said he was still my father and reminded me that this was his house. He added that if their mail mixed with mine, it was not a big deal. He said I was making a problem from nothing. I set the letter down very carefully. My mother tried to change the subject by talking about a neighbor's new baby. My father turned to the television and raised the volume again, like that was the end of the conversation. Later, while my mother was in the kitchen, Lucas showed up. He walked in without knocking, as usual. He gave me a lazy nod and asked my father if he could borrow the car. My father said no and told him that they were low on gas. Lucas shrugged and then turned to me. He said he had been meaning to talk to me about the money. He said he appreciated my help. Then he added something that changed everything. He said he had told some friends that he was lucky, that he had a brother who would always bail him out. He said it like a joke. Then he said that if I kept complaining, he and my parents would find a way to handle things without me. He hinted that they might sell something important and said that if anything went wrong, it would be my fault for not supporting them. For a second, I did not understand. Then I realized what he meant. The house. Years ago, when the market had crashed, my parents had been close to losing this place. Their mortgage payments had ballooned at the wrong time. My father had called me in a panic. He had never sounded so small. At that time, I had stepped in. I had refinanced the loan in my own name with them listed as residents. They could afford the new payment. I could handle the risk. It made sense then. Only my parents and I knew that the deed sat mostly under my name. Now, Lucas was talking about selling the house if I stopped helping. He did not know the full legal details, but he knew enough to use it as a vague threat. He said that if they had to, they would cash out and start over. The unspoken part was clear. They thought they could decide that without me. My father joined in and said they would do whatever they had to do for the family. He said that if I walked away, I would be the one breaking everything apart. He looked at me like a disappointed teacher. He told me I should not force them into hard choices. In that moment, something inside me settled completely. I had been angry before. Now the anger cooled into something else. A clean, hard line. I realized that they had not only taken my savings. They were ready to gamble with the one asset that actually tied us all together, an asset I had rescued with my own work and credit. To them, it was just another piece on the board. To me, it was the proof that I had been holding this family up for years. I did not argue. I simply nodded and said I understood. Lucas smirked, thinking he had won. My father relaxed, assuming I had accepted my role again. My mother came in with a plate of snacks, smiling nervously, clearly relieved that no one was shouting. I stayed another hour, just long enough to avoid suspicion. I let them talk around me. Lucas chatted about some half-planned business venture. Elaine arrived with her kids and complained about school fees. My father made comments about politics and work ethic. My mother fussed over everyone. It looked like every other family visit on the surface. But my attention was somewhere else. I watched how quickly they forgot the tension. I noticed the small things I had overlooked before. Lucas's new shoes, designer brand, Elaine's kids with expensive tablets in their hands, the fresh paint in the hallway that my father had claimed they could not afford last year, the small upgrades all around the house, new curtains, a new fridge. My savings had not gone to a single emergency. They had gone to comfort, to the things they liked but did not want to work for. On my way out, my mother walked me to the door. She asked if I was still upset. She said she hoped I understood that they had done what they had to do. She added that they loved me. I told her that I understood everything much more clearly now. It was the truth. When I reached my car, I sat there for a minute with my hands on the steering wheel again, but this time I did not feel frozen. I felt focused. I drove straight home. The first thing I did in my apartment was take out the old metal box from the back of my closet. Inside, I kept documents I did not want to lose in a fire or a move, birth certificate, degree, some old contracts from earlier jobs. I had always been a person who kept records, not out of paranoia, out of habit. I spread the documents on my small kitchen table. Among them were the papers from the mortgage refinance, copies of the deed, payment schedules, letters from the bank, all with clear dates and clear names. I did not read every word. I just glanced over them and remembered the day we had signed them at the bank, my father's grateful handshake, my mother's tears. Then I opened my laptop and logged into my email. I searched for transfer, loan, help, and my siblings' names. The results filled the screen, old requests from years ago, some written in panicked tones, some casual, some joking, all of them asking for money or favors. I opened my banking history and scrolled through pages of transfers labeled Family Help, House, Lucas Payment, Elaine Wedding Fund. I had written those labels myself because I liked to know where my money went. Now, those labels also looked like a map of every time I had stepped in while they stepped back. I did not print anything. I did not screenshot anything. I simply looked, and I kept track in my head. My mind worked in patterns. This was just another kind of project. As the night went on, memories lined up beside the numbers on the screen. The time my father told an uncle that Lucas was unlucky and that I was blessed. The moment Elaine joked that if I ever had kids, at least the family would know someone could pay for college. The way my mother always said I was good with money and then treated that fact like a banknote she could cash whenever she wanted. Around midnight, I closed the laptop. I walked into my small bedroom and stared at the top shelf of my wardrobe. Up there sat a plain black USB drive and a couple of small folders I rarely touched. They held copies of some agreements from work, a list of contacts, and a few old messages related to my parents' house. Backup pieces of my own history. I took them down and set them on the desk near my bed. I did not open them. I just placed them where I could see them easily. It was not a plan yet, not in the detailed sense, but it was a direction. The next day, during lunch break, I stepped out of the office and walked to a small park a block away. I sat on a bench under a tree and called Marcy, my cousin by marriage and the only person in the extended family who ever treated me like an adult rather than a resource. She was an accountant and knew numbers better than anyone I had met. I did not give her every detail. I simply told her that my parents had used my access to move funds from my account without my consent. I mentioned that the house deed situation was complicated and that I needed to understand my position. She did not react with shock or pity. She went straight to practical questions. She asked about dates, amounts, and whose name appeared where. When she was done asking, she told me that I needed to talk to a lawyer. She said she would help me gather whatever information I needed. She reminded me that even family relations had legal limits. Her voice was calm but firm. After I hung up, I sat there on the bench and watched people walk by with coffee cups and children and shopping bags. Life went on around me like always. For the first time, I let myself imagine a future where my parents and my siblings no longer had free access to my time, my work, or my money. That evening, back in my apartment, I opened my contacts list. My thumb hovered over one name for a long moment, Harold Kim. We had met years earlier when I needed help reviewing a contract from a previous employer. He was a quiet man who asked good questions. We had stayed in loose contact since then. I looked at the USB drive on my desk. I looked at the folders. I thought about the empty savings account, the opened mail, the threatened house sale, the messages in the group chat. Then I tapped Harold's name and brought the phone to my ear. As it started to ring, I understood that this was the first time in my life I was not calling someone to ask how to help my family. I was calling to ask how to protect myself from them. Harold picked up on the third ring. His voice sounded exactly the way I remembered it from years ago, steady and a little dry, like nothing surprised him anymore. I told him I needed some advice about a family situation. I did not use big words. I just said that my parents had moved money from my account without my consent, and that the house we all thought of as theirs was not as simple on paper as everybody believed. He did not react loudly. He asked me simple questions instead. He wanted dates, names, amounts, and whether anything had been put in writing over the years. I answered as best as I could from memory. When I mentioned that my father had opened a letter from the bank that was clearly meant for me, there was a pause on his end. Then he suggested we meet in person. We set a time for later in the week. He said to bring whatever I had. He did not promise anything. He just said it was better to know where I stood. When the call ended, I sat there with the phone still in my hand. The decision felt different from all the choices I had made before. Every other time, I had told myself I was doing what was best for the family. This time, I was taking a step that had nothing to do with what they wanted. It was only about what was fair. Over the next few days, I went through my routines almost like normal. I went to work, answered emails, attended meetings, and reviewed plans. My coworkers saw nothing strange. At lunch, I sat with the same people, listened to them talk about sports and movies, and gave the same short comments I always did. Inside, something had shifted. I watched myself move through my day and thought about how hard I worked for people who actually respected me. The contrast with home grew sharper. In the evenings, I went back to my apartment and quietly gathered information. I did not tell anyone I was doing it. I opened banking records and scrolled slowly through transactions from the last 10 years. I marked the big ones on a scrap of paper. Not amounts, just dates and names. I pulled out old folders with copies of the refinance and wrote down the year and the bank's name. I called Marcy again and told her I would be meeting with a lawyer. She sounded relieved. She said she had seen little signs for years, the way my parents talked about me at family events, as if my job only existed to fund their projects. She offered to explain any financial terms I did not understand after my meeting, no questions asked. I thanked her. It felt strange and good to have someone in the family who did not try to guilt me for asking basic questions. On the day of the meeting with Harold, I woke up before my alarm. For a moment, I thought about canceling. Old habits pushed back hard. A voice in my head told me I was making things bigger than they were, that money came and went, that family was more important. Then I remembered the zero in my account, the opened envelope, and Lucas talking about selling a house he did not own. I showered, dressed in a simple button-down and clean slacks, and put the small stack of folders and my USB drive into my bag. On the way to his office, I stopped at a coffee shop. Marcy was already there at a corner table, laptop open, a spreadsheet on the screen. She had offered to meet me before I went to see Harold, just to help me organize my thoughts. She slid a coffee toward me and told me to sit. Then she asked me to walk her through everything again, slowly, from the start. I told her about the reunion, the empty account, the kitchen conversation. I mentioned the old refinance, the group chat messages, Lucas's comment about the house, and the opened mail. She tapped on her keyboard as I spoke, building a simple timeline. She did not judge. She just listened and asked follow-up questions, like a doctor examining a wound. When I finished, she turned the laptop toward me. On the screen, there was a small table with dates, short descriptions, and a column simply labeled Evidence. Some rows had things I could easily prove, like statements or letters. Others were just memories. She pointed to the pattern. She said that looking at it this way, it was obvious what had been happening. It wasn't just one bad decision by my parents. It was a habit that had deep roots. She told me that if I was going to talk to a lawyer, going in with this level of organization would help. Then she closed the laptop and told me something I did not know I needed to hear. She said that saying no to people who hurt you did not make you a bad son. It made you a sane adult. Her words settled in my chest as I walked the next few blocks to Harold's office. His building was an older one, with heavy doors and a quiet lobby. The waiting room smelled faintly of paper and coffee. Framed certificates lined one wall. I sat in a chair and watched the second-hand tick on a clock, feeling strangely calm. When Harold brought me into his office, he shook my hand and asked how I'd been. He had one of those desks that always looked almost empty, with just a computer monitor, a legal pad, and a pen. It made everything feel simpler. I handed him my small stack of folders. He flipped through them but did not linger on any page. Then he asked me to tell him the story in my own words. I did. I started with the refinance years ago, then moved to the repeated loans, then the reunion, the transfer, the conversation about the house, the opened letter, and the threats. He did not interrupt much. Once in a while, he jotted a note down or asked a short question. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and looked at me for a long moment. He said he had seen similar things before. He talked about situations where family pressure turned into financial abuse. He said it bluntly, like a diagnosis. The word hit me harder than I expected. He pointed out that giving my father online access years ago for a specific health-related reason did not mean they could use it forever for anything they wanted. He noted that opening my mail without permission was not just rude, it was a problem. He did not promise miracles. He told me that there were steps I could take to protect myself, to correct records, to distance my finances from my parents' reach. He also said that any action I took would likely cause serious conflict. I nodded. I already knew that. The conflict had started long before I sat down in that chair. Then he outlined, in simple terms, what information he would need from me if I chose to move forward. He mentioned certain records, certain confirmations, things that showed my role in the house and in the accounts. He spoke in general terms, not naming specific laws or quoting anything, but I understood. This was no longer just a personal argument. It was something that could be addressed through the systems my family claimed to respect when those systems worked in their favor. At the end of the meeting, he asked me if I was sure I wanted to take this path. He said that once he started certain processes, they would be difficult to reverse. I thought about my father's face when he told me they needed it more. I thought about my mother turning away as if she was helpless and had no voice. I thought about Lucas laughing while he called me his permanent safety net. I said I was sure. When I left his office, the air outside felt colder and cleaner. I walked slowly back toward the main street, noticing details I usually ignored: cracks in the sidewalk, a stray leaf stuck in a grate, the smell of a food truck on the corner. The world looked normal, while something inside me realigned. Over the following week, I moved through 2 lives at once. In one life, I went to work as usual. I answered calls, I attended progress meetings, I wrote reports and found solutions to problems. My manager praised a design change I suggested and told the team to follow my lead. People thanked me, shook my hand, and treated me like a person whose judgment mattered. In the other life, the quiet one, I gathered what Harold had asked for. I visited the bank during my lunch break. The branch was busy, with people lined up holding paychecks and deposit slips. When my turn came, I spoke with a representative in a small glass-walled office. I did not raise my voice or share my whole story. I simply explained that I needed complete records for certain accounts, going back several years. I mentioned that I wanted to review who had access and what authorizations were still active. The employee checked her screen, asked for some ID, and then nodded. She printed a few forms for me to take, told me what kind of history they could provide, and mentioned that I could also access it through my online profile. As I left the bank, I glanced at my phone. New messages in the family chat. My father had sent a photo of a contractor's truck in front of their house with a caption about finally doing the renovation right. Lucas had added a message about how it was good to have support when you need it. Elaine had posted a picture of her kids playing in my parents' backyard with a caption about how blessed they all were to have such strong parents who always provide. The irony made my jaw tighten. They were using my stolen savings to pay for cosmetic changes and bragging about my parents' generosity. Not one of them had sent me a private message to ask if I was okay. That evening, I sat in my home office with the blinds half closed. The desk lamp cast a soft circle of light over the surface. I spread out what I had: copies of statements, a simple timeline, notes from my meeting with Harold, and the little list Marcy had helped me make. On my computer, I created a folder and named it with a neutral word: nothing dramatic. Inside that folder, I saved digital copies of the things that mattered. I did not spend hours staring at every number. I did not replay every conversation in my head. I was past that. Instead, I treated it like any other project. I sorted, labeled, and backed things up. I checked details twice. I made sure there were no gaps that would surprise me later. At one point, I sat back in my chair and looked around the room. The walls were plain. A few photos from work events hung in simple frames. In one of them, I stood with my team, all of us smiling after a successful project. I realized that in my entire apartment, there were only 2 photos of my family, one from Elaine's wedding and one from my parents' 40th anniversary. In both, I was half at the edge of the frame, the one holding someone else's coat or handling some small problem in the background. My phone buzzed on the desk. A new notification, but not from the group chat this time. It was an email from my mother. The subject line read, "Family Appreciation Dinner. You must come. I opened it and saw a short message about a special dinner they were planning once the house renovation was done. She wrote that they wanted to celebrate everything we've built together as a family. She said attendance was not optional, and added a smiley face at the end like it was a harmless joke. Attached to the message was a formal invitation image. My father's name was at the top as host. The location was a hotel ballroom across town, one with big chandeliers and white tablecloths. The date was set for a few weeks away. Below the image, my father had added a line of his own. He wrote that it was time for me to remember where I came from and to show my loyalty in front of everyone. I stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling the quiet in my chest deepen. Then I clicked Respond and selected Yes. The weeks before the dinner felt strangely calm. On the surface, nothing big changed. I still woke up to the same quiet apartment, showered, dressed, and drove to the same office. I still sat in the same meeting rooms, listening to people talk about deadlines and budgets. At work, they still trusted me to keep projects on track. My manager still pointed to my charts when he wanted to show progress. I still answered emails and solved problems before they became crises. Underneath that normal routine, another life was building. The first thing I did after replying yes to my mother's invitation was change every password I had. Bank, email, cloud storage, even the streaming services. Anything my father might still have access to, I closed. It felt like closing windows in a house before a storm. Quiet, boring steps, but necessary. At the bank, I opened a new account with no connections to my parents at all. I asked the clerk to check which profiles still showed any outside access. She gave me a polite look and said there were some old authorizations that could be removed. I told her to remove them. She clicked a few buttons and said it was done. It took less than 3 minutes to end something that had shaped years of my life. A few days later, I met with Harold again. I went back to his office with a slightly thicker folder and a small notebook. I had written down dates, descriptions, and simple notes. He read through my list, asked a few more questions, and underlined a couple of entries. Then he spoke in that same steady voice and laid out what would happen next if I agreed. He did not show me any official letters. He did not slide any legal forms across the desk. He just told me in general terms that there were steps we could take before the dinner and steps we could take after. Some things would be filed quietly without my family knowing right away. Other things would only become visible at the right moment. He asked again if I was sure. I nodded. He studied my face for a second and then gave a small nod of his own. He said his office would handle the technical parts. My job, he said, was to stay calm, follow instructions, and not warn anyone. On my way out, his assistant stopped me with a simple comment. She said she had seen a lot of people come into that office looking scared or angry. She said I looked tired, but clear. It sounded like a small thing, but it stayed with me. I met with Marcy one more time at the coffee shop. She had brought her laptop again, but this time she barely opened it. She told me that things were already moving in the background and that I did not need to obsess over every number now. She reminded me that I had done enough. She also mentioned casually that my parents had sent her an invitation to the same dinner since she fell under extended family. She said she would be there at one of the tables near the back. She added that it might be good for me to know I had at least one person in the room who understood what was really happening. The family group chat grew more active as the dinner date came closer. My mother posted pictures of the renovated living room with new paint, new shelves, and new furniture. She wrote long messages about how grateful she was for my father's hard work and for the support of our children. She did not say which child had provided most of that support. My father wrote about the dinner like it was some grand event. He told everyone there would be speeches and a special presentation about the family's history. He said he wanted to honor sacrifices and talk about who had really kept everything running over the years. Lucas chimed in with jokes about dress codes and open bars. He said he hoped I would not show up in my office clothes and drag down the mood. Elaine reminded everyone to bring small gifts for our parents, calling it a thank you ceremony. No one asked me if I could afford a gift after they had emptied my savings. They assumed I could. In their minds, I always could. I kept my responses short. I wrote that I would be there, nothing more. One evening, my father called me directly. That alone was unusual. He preferred group messages where his words had an audience. On the phone, his voice was full of forced warmth. He said he wanted to make sure I was coming. He said it would mean a lot to my mother. Then his tone sharpened a little. He said this dinner would be a good time for me to show some appreciation and prove that I still knew where I belonged. I answered in calm, flat words. I told him I understood. He seemed satisfied. He said he had a big speech planned and that people would finally see the whole story of our family. He sounded proud, like a man about to stand under a spotlight. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the small pile of folders there. I realized that for the first time, my father and I were both preparing for the same event, but from completely different angles. He was rehearsing a speech about control. I was preparing to stop letting him control anything I cared about. The night before the dinner, I slept surprisingly well. There were no racing thoughts, no long replay of old arguments. When I woke in the morning, I moved through my routine in slow, steady steps. I shaved carefully. I chose a dark suit I rarely wore. It was simple, not flashy, but it fit well. I pressed a plain white shirt and picked a tie that did not stand out. On the dresser, I laid out my watch, my wallet, my keys, and my phone. Beside them, I placed my bag. Inside the bag were a few basic items I always carried: a notebook, a pen, my USB drive, and the small folders that mattered. I had not added anything dramatic. I did not need to. The important actions were already in motion elsewhere. Before I left the apartment, I stood in the doorway and looked back once. The place was quiet, neat, and small. It had always felt like a waiting room to me, a place between bigger things. That morning, it felt like something else, my own space, separate from anyone else's decisions. I locked the door and walked to my car. The drive to the hotel took about half an hour. I left early, not because I wanted to arrive before everyone else, but because I did not want to rush. I watched the traffic flow around me. People changed lanes and honked and checked their phones at red lights. I kept my hand steady on the wheel. When I pulled into the parking garage under the hotel, I parked near the exit ramp and turned off the engine. For a few minutes, I stayed in the driver's seat and just breathed. The air in the garage was cool and smelled faintly of oil and concrete. My phone buzzed once. It was a short text from Harold's office saying that certain things had been confirmed and that the timeline we had discussed was still in place. There were no details, just enough words to tell me that the quiet work was done. A second message came from Marcy. She wrote that she had arrived early and that the ballroom looked expensive. She added a small note saying I should remember to breathe and not let anyone pull me into side arguments. She promised to stay out of the way but keep her eyes open. I put the phone back in my pocket and stepped out of the car. Inside the hotel, the air changed. It smelled like polished floors, perfume, and food warming in hidden kitchens. A wide hallway led toward the event spaces, lined with framed pictures and soft lights. People in formal clothes moved past me, carrying jackets, purses, and small wrapped gifts. Near the end of the hall, a stand held a sign with my family's name and an arrow pointing toward one of the ballrooms. The sign used a formal font, as if this dinner were some corporate event instead of a family performance. I walked closer and heard laughter through the closed doors. My father's voice carried even through the thick wood. He was greeting people warmly, telling old stories, enjoying his role. I could hear my mother's lighter, nervous laugh and the higher sound of children running around. A staff member at a small table by the entrance checked a printed list and smiled when I gave my name. She handed me a simple place card and said my table number. I glanced at the card. My seat was not at the main family table. It was a bit farther back, with cousins and extended relatives. I almost smiled. Even now, with everything they had taken from me, my parents still did not see me as the center of anything. I slipped the card into my pocket and waited a moment by the wall. The ballroom doors were closed, but through the small gap where they met in the middle, I could see flashes of light and movement. White tablecloths, glasses shining under chandeliers. My father in a suit he only wore for weddings and funerals. For a second, an old reflex tugged at me. A part of me wanted to push the doors open, walk in, and pretend nothing had changed. I could sit in my assigned seat, smile when people looked my way, and nod along to my father's speech. I could let the night end with the usual mix of small insults and forced hugs. Then I thought about the empty savings account, the new paint in their living room, the opened letter, and Lucas saying that I would always bail them out. I thought about the quiet work Harold had done and the careful list Marcy had put together with me. I reached into my pocket and felt the small weight of my phone and the edges of the place card. With my other hand, I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder. It felt steady. Inside the ballroom, someone tapped a microphone. The sound came through the door, sharp and clear, cutting through the background noise of conversation. My father's voice followed, slightly amplified now. He called for attention and said he wanted to start with a few words about family and sacrifice. I stepped forward, put my hand on the door handle, and began to push it open. When I walked into the ballroom, my father was already standing at the microphone. He was facing the crowd, smiling wide, telling everyone how our family had always stuck together. People turned when they saw me, but it was the polite kind of attention, not real interest. To them, I was just another guest arriving a bit late. I took in the room in one slow sweep. Round tables, white tablecloths, tall centerpieces. My parents' table at the front, framed by a small stage and a projector screen. My mother sat beside my father, hands folded on her lap, smiling too hard. Lucas lounged on one side, tie already loose. Elaine sat on the other with her kids, who were restless in their small suits. My father was telling the story of how he had come to this country with nothing. He explained once again how he had worked himself to the bone so his children could have better lives. The crowd nodded. Some people clapped at the right points. He talked about sacrifice the way some people talk about sport scores. When he saw me near the aisle, he gestured for me to come closer. He said to the room that I had finally arrived, that his oldest son might be late but would always show up when the family needed him. People laughed softly. I walked to the edge of the stage and waited until he had finished his current sentence. Then I asked calmly if I could speak for a moment. His smile went tight, but he stepped aside and handed me the microphone. He clearly expected a small, grateful speech. The room grew quiet in that way that happens when people sense something unscripted. I looked at the faces in front of me, aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends, my parents' neighbors, church members. I told them that my father had spoken about sacrifice and that he was right. There had been plenty of it. I said that tonight was the right time to be clear about who had sacrificed what. I kept my voice steady. I explained that the house my parents liked to call the family home had nearly been lost years before, and that I had refinanced it in my name to save it. I said that legally I was the primary owner. A few heads turned toward my parents' table. My mother's smile dropped. I went on. I told them that some months earlier, a large amount of money had been moved from my personal savings account without my consent, using access I had once given my father for a medical emergency and never intended for anything else. I said I had spoken with the bank and with my lawyer. At that moment, the ballroom doors opened behind me. Hotel staff entered with a courier carrying a stack of envelopes. They moved carefully, checking names against a list. People watched them, puzzled. I told the room that earlier that day, the bank had officially reversed the unauthorized transfer and frozen any remaining joint activity. I said my parents no longer had any legal access to my accounts. I added that, as of that afternoon, the mortgage and deed paperwork had also been corrected and recorded again, making it clear that I alone controlled the house. The courier reached the front table and handed envelopes to my father, my mother, Lucas, and Elaine. Each envelope had their names on it in neat black print. I explained that inside those envelopes were formal notices from my lawyer. For my parents, I said, they contained written confirmation that all financial authorizations they had ever held for me were revoked, that the house would no longer be available as a bank machine for anyone, and that any future decisions about it would be mine alone. For Lucas and Elaine, I said, they contained a summary of every loan I had given them, and a simple statement that no further money would be coming, ever. A murmur moved through the room. My father tried to speak, but his mouth just opened and closed. My mother stared at the paper in her hands, as if it were written in another language. Lucas went red, then pale. Elaine shook her head in disbelief. I finished by saying that I still wished them well, but that from this day on, I would no longer be their emergency fund, their silent co-signer, or their invisible sacrifice. I said that whatever story they chose to tell about the past was their problem, but the future would be different. Then I set the microphone down on the stand. The room was utterly silent. The only sound was the soft crackle of paper as my father finally tore open his envelope and saw the letterhead. I picked up my bag from the floor, stepped down from the stage, and walked up the aisle toward the doors. No one called after me, no one moved. As I reached the exit, I heard a chair scrape hard against the floor and my father say my name. Once, in a voice that sounded nothing like the proud man from a few minutes before, I kept